On June 23, 1993, Lorena Bobbitt's story left a deep mark in American history. This case is not only a murder of passion, but also reveals the complexity of domestic violence, sexual assault, and their consequences. Lorena, immigrant from Ecuador, experienced long-term abuse and fear, and finally made a radical decision to cut off her husband's penis, changing her life and the life of her husband, John Wayne Bobbitt. In 1989, young Lorena Bobbitt set foot on this strange land with a beautiful vision of the United States as an immigrant from Ecuador. She hopes to find a better life here and pursue her dreams. When she first arrived, Lorena was full of expectations for the future. She worked hard to learn English, find a job, and hope to integrate into this new environment. However, the turning point of fate came quietly when she met John Wayne Bobbitt. Lorena Bobbitt and John Wayne Bobbitt met on a sunny day. As an immigrant from Ecuador, Lorena pursued her own dream in the United States. She hoped to find her place in this new environment and build a family. John is a veteran with handsome appearance, extroverted personality full of charm and confidence. The two met at a friend's party, and the attraction between them quickly ignited like a spark. Their first love was full of romance and passion. When dating, John always behaved considerately and took Lorena to the movies and dinner together when they were together. They laughed all the time as if they were the only two people in the world. Lorena felt that she had found someone she could rely on, and she believed that this relationship would bring a bright future. Within a few months, the two decided to get married and got married in 1990. Life after marriage was like a fairy tale at first. Lorena was immersed in the sweetness of marriage and enjoyed every moment with John. However, as time went on, the marriage gradually revealed its dark side. The initial small quarrels began to become frequent, and these quarrels were often caused by John's emotional loss after drinking. John became unreasonable when drunk, and his personality began to show violent tendencies. At first, there were just some insignificant disputes, such as dissatisfaction with housework or picky about the taste of dinner. But as time went on, these quarrels gradually escalated into more serious conflicts. Lorena began to feel uneasy, and she realized that things were not as simple as she thought. As John's drinking problem worsened, his violent behavior towards Lorena became more and more serious. At first, he only yelled at her occasionally, but soon, the verbal insults turned into physical attacks. Lorena was often awakened in the dead of night to face an angry and drunk husband. He would hit her with his fists and even push her to the ground when he lost control of his emotions. Each attack made Lorena feel extremely humiliated and terrified. She tried to find a way to escape, but the people around her seemed unable to understand what she was going through. In her mind, this marriage went from being romantic at first to a nightmare, and she was trapped in this nightmare with nowhere to escape. As the violence intensified, Lorena gradually felt isolated and helpless. She tried to confide her pain to her friends, but most people did not understand. Some friends even thought it was a small quarrel between husband and wife and not worth making a fuss about, and those who could understand her situation were often powerless. They could only comfort her and hope that she could endure it all. This sense of isolation made Lorena feel desperate, and she began to doubt her own value and the meaning of her existence at home. She was always careful not to anger John, and every time he came home drunk, she was terrified. She learned to hide her emotions and bury the pain deep in her heart to avoid causing greater conflicts. In such an environment, Lorena not only suffered physical injuries, but also experienced profound psychological torture every night. She always tossed and turned, and her mind echoed the experiences of the past few years. Every time she was beaten, every time she was humiliated, every time she cried helplessly, these memories shrouded her like a shadow, making her unable to breathe. In order to escape this pain, Lorena tried to find various ways to relieve her anxiety and fear. She attended some psychological counseling courses, hoping to find a solution to the problem. However, when she told her experience to the psychologist, she always found it difficult to express the fear and pain deep in her heart. Every memory was like a sharp blade, cutting through her heart, making her unbearable. Although Lorena tried to endure it all, she always longed for change deep in her heart. After quarrels and violence again and again, she began to think about whether she should end this marriage. However, she knew that leaving did not mean safety. For someone who has been abused for a long time, running away is often not a solution. In this situation, Lorena began to seek professional help. She joined some domestic violence support groups, hoping to find like-minded people, however. When she saw other victims sharing their stories, she realized that her pain was not alone in these sharings. She felt a glimmer of hope that it was possible to get out of the predicament through solidarity and support. As time went by, Lorena gradually realized that she was not powerless. In constant reflection, she began to think about how to change the status quo. One night, when John came home drunk again and abused her, she finally made a difficult but firm decision: no longer endure, no longer give in. This decision was not easy, but a choice made after countless struggles and reflections. Although she didn't know what the future would be like, she was driven by a strong desire deep in her heart, that is, to seek freedom and dignity. At this moment, she was no longer the person who passively endured abuse, but a person who bravely resisted fate. June 23, 1993 became the darkest night in Lorena's life. It was an ordinary summer night, and the stars outside the window twinkled faintly. As if mourning for the tragedy that was about to happen, Lorena Bobbitt sat on the bed, feeling uneasy. Her husband, John, was drunk again and came home much later than usual. She knew that tonight might be another sleepless night. Whenever John came back drunk, she would always feel a sense of fear in her heart, as if an invisible monster was lurking in the darkness. As time went by, Lorena's anxiety became more and more serious. She tried to calm herself down and told herself to be careful and avoid angering him. However, this caution did not change the deteriorating relationship between them. She took a deep breath and tried to relax herself, but the uneasiness in her heart surged like a tide. Finally, John opened the door. His eyes were blurred and angry, and he exuded the pungent smell of alcohol. Lorena felt the chill, and she knew that she would have to face his emotional, out-of-control side again tonight. Deep in her heart, a strong sense of uneasiness loomed over her like a shadow. "You're waiting for me here again," John roared loudly, his voice full of endless anger. "Can't you make me something delicious?" Lorena lowered her head, not daring to look him in the eye. She tried to recall the dinner she prepared for him today, but it was obvious that this did not get his approval. She whispered, "I'm sorry, I thought you would like it." "Like, you don't know what I like at all," John interrupted her angrily, then took a step forward and pushed Lorena to the ground. At that moment, she felt as if the whole world was collapsing. John began to use violence against her. His hand tightly grasped Lorena's wrist like an iron clamp and pulled her up. She felt a sharp pain as if her body was torn apart. At this moment, she not only felt physical pain, but also an unspeakable sense of humiliation that overwhelmed her. In this situation, Lorena realized that this was not only a physical violation, but also a complete trampling of her personality and dignity.
Each of his attacks was like a heavy hammer,
hitting her fragile self-esteem. At that moment, she felt that she could no longer endure this kind of life. Tears could not stop flowing down. She wanted to resist, but was bound by fear. On that sleepless night, Lorena Bobbitt's heart was full of contradictions and struggles. The room was silent, and only John's heavy breathing broke the tranquility of the night. His body was like a heavy mountain pressing on her heart, making her feel suffocated. The pain and humiliation of the past few years intertwined into an invisible force at this moment, forcing her to make an irreversible decision. Lorena slowly got up and walked out of the bedroom lightly. Her heart full of fear and expectation, she knew that she was about to embark on a road of no return. But at this moment, she was no longer afraid. She walked into the kitchen, her palms sweating and her heartbeat accelerating. The knife was on the kitchen countertop, flashing cold light under the dim light. The knife was not only a tool, but also a symbol of her fight against years of pain. Between the flashes of the knife, her heart was filled with complex emotions. On the one hand, she felt a sense of relief, a relief that came from resisting years of abuse. On the other hand, she was shrouded in fear. She knew that this action would completely change the lives of both of them and might also change her own life. "Do I really want to do this?" Lorena asked herself repeatedly in her heart. Every time she recalled the violence John inflicted on her, she felt suffocated. Those moments of being beaten, insulted, and ignored came like a tide, making her unable to extricate herself in such a situation. She finally understood only by resisting can she regain her freedom. When Lorena grasped the handle of the knife, her fingers trembled slightly. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and concentrated all her fear and despair in this moment. The blade cut through the air with an indescribable power. At the moment of cutting off the penis, she felt an unprecedented sense of relief and fear intertwined. At that moment, all the long-suppressed emotions poured out like a flood, impacting her fragile heart. I finally control my own destiny. This was the thought that flashed through Lorena's mind at this moment. She was no longer the victim who passively endured abuse, but a person who chose to resist fate, although she knew she was about to face legal and social criticism at this moment. None of this mattered. Afterwards, Lorena drove away from the scene and threw the cut penis out of the car window. The wind whistled past as if cheering her decision. However, this relief did not last long. When she realized the possible consequences of what she had done, panic surged into her heart again. Will I be arrested? Will I lose my freedom? These questions kept circling in her mind, but at the same time, she also felt an unprecedented sense of relief. This relief came from the control of her own destiny and a thorough resistance to years of pain. As time went on, Lorena's heart was filled with complex and contradictory emotions. Both relief and fear, she began to think about her future and how this resistance would affect her life. After fleeing the scene, she could not find anyone to talk to, and she didn't know how to face the rest of her life. Will I become a criminal? This thought made her feel extremely heavy. After years of domestic violence, she finally mustered the courage to resist, but she had to face legal sanction. This contradiction made her feel extremely painful, but at the same time made her realize that all this was for the pursuit of freedom and dignity. Lorena Bobbitt's story quickly became the headlines of the American media. Her behavior cutting off her husband John's penis after he was drunk attracted widespread attention and discussion. And major news channels rushed to report this bizarre and tragic incident. The media's enthusiasm for this case was almost crazy, and they sent reporters to dig deep into Lorena's background, family, and mental state. In the news reports, Lorena was portrayed as a victim, and her story triggered a deep reflection on the issue of domestic violence among the public. Many women's organizations and social activists began to stand up to defend her, believing that her behavior was a desperate resistance after long-term abuse. This incident not only made people pay attention to the issue of domestic violence, but also triggered an in-depth discussion of women's rights and mental health. As the case entered the court process, Lorena was charged with malicious injury and faced up to 20 years in prison. During the trial, Lorena's defense lawyer made a key argument. She was mentally ill due to long-term abuse. The legal team tried to show the jury everything she had experienced by collecting evidence, expert testimony, and Lorena's own statement. In court, Lorena spoke publicly about the pain she had experienced for the first time. She described her relationship with John, from the sweetness of their first encounter to the violence and humiliation after marriage. She recounted every time she was beaten, every time she was insulted, and every time she struggled to survive in despair. Her voice trembled, but her eyes revealed a firm strength. I felt trapped, Lorena said in court. I didn't know how to escape. I just wanted to be free. I just wanted to end it all. Her words deeply moved those present, and many shed tears of sympathy. During the trial, mental health experts were also invited to testify. They pointed out that long-term domestic violence can have a profound psychological impact on victims, including post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, depression, and anxiety. These experts emphasize that in such cases, victims may lose their minds and engage in extreme behavior. Domestic violence is not only a physical injury, but also a serious violation of mental health, a psychologist pointed out in court. Everything Lorena has experienced has put her in a state of constant fear and despair, which may cause her to lose her mind at some point. This testimony made the jury members begin to re-examine the case. People began to realize that when judging Lorena's behavior, they should not only focus on the fact that she cut off John's penis, but also consider the pain and despair behind it. After weeks of trial, the jury finally made a verdict. They found Lorena not guilty due to temporary insanity. This verdict not only allowed Lorena to regain her freedom, but also triggered heated discussions from all walks of life. Many people began to pay attention to the issue of domestic violence and conducted in-depth discussions on women's rights and mental health. This is an important victory, not only for Lorena, but also for all people who suffer from domestic violence, a women's rights activist said in an interview. This case allows us to see the profound impact of domestic violence on victims and also makes us realize that we need to provide them with more support. UV break after the trial. Lorena Bobbitt officially divorced John Wayne Bobbitt in 1995. The end of this marriage not only marked an important turning point in her personal life, but also opened a new chapter for her future. After the divorce, Lorena felt a sense of relief, although she knew that she still had to face many challenges. She finally got rid of that painful and violent relationship. In the days after her divorce, Lorena began to re-examine her life. She realized that she was not just a victim, but also a person who had experienced profound pain. This awakening made her decide not to remain silent, but to speak out for those who also suffered domestic violence. She hopes that through her own experience, she can help more people realize the seriousness of domestic violence and encourage them to bravely seek help. Lorena actively participates in advocacy for victims of domestic violence. She has joined multiple nonprofit organizations and participated in various events and publicity to raise public awareness of domestic violence issues. At these events, she shares her story and tells about everything she has experienced, including her relationship with John, the abuse she suffered, and her final choice to resist. I hope my experience can inspire those who are experiencing pain and let them know that they are not alone. Lorena said at an event, no matter how desperate it is, there is always hope. Her words deeply touched everyone present and made many victims feel a glimmer of warmth and hope. Lorena used her experience to actively carry out public education activities to popularize the knowledge of domestic violence. She participated in TV shows, radio interviews, and public speeches, trying to let more people know the manifestations, effects, and how to seek help of domestic violence during these events. She stressed the importance of mental health and how to identify and respond to domestic violence. Domestic violence is not just UV break. Through these efforts, Lorena has successfully attracted social attention to the issue of domestic violence. More and more people are beginning to realize that this is not an isolated phenomenon, but a widespread problem that requires the joint efforts of the whole society to solve. In addition to raising public awareness, Lorena also actively supports other victims of domestic violence. She participated in some support groups to share experiences and provide emotional support with other victims. In these groups, she not only listened to other people's stories, but also shared her own experiences to help them find courage and hope. We are all in the same boat. Lorena often told other victims, no matter what you have been through, don't give up hope. You have the right to pursue happiness and freedom. Her words warmed many people and inspired them to bravely step out of the shadow. As Lorena's advocacy work gradually deepened, she began to have a greater and greater impact on society. Media attention to her has also continued to increase, with major news platforms reporting her story and inviting her to participate in discussions on domestic violence. This exposure not only made more people aware of the problem of domestic violence, but also promoted social attention to this issue. During this period, Lorena also worked with some legislatures to promote legal reforms on domestic violence prevention and victim protection. She hopes to strengthen the protection of victims of domestic violence through legislation and provide them with more resources and support. These efforts have been widely recognized and have prompted some states to begin to re-examine relevant laws to ensure better protection for victims of domestic violence. The Lorena Bobbitt case remains an important discussion case about emotional and violent relationships, prompting people to think about how to better support victims and prevent domestic violence. Through her own experience and advocacy work, Lorena has not only changed her own destiny, but also affected the lives of countless people. I hope my story can be a force that allows more people to face their difficulties bravely. Lorena said, no matter where you are, you must believe that one day you will find your own light. Through this story, we hope to trigger more discussions about domestic violence and its impact and bring hope and change to those who are still struggling in pain. At the same time, it also reminds all sectors of society to pay attention to and support victims of domestic violence so that they can bravely step out of the shadows and rebuild their lives. This is not only a reflection on Lorena's personal experience, but also a profound reflection on how the entire society can better protect vulnerable groups.